I briefly introduced you to Jess already, and she's made some fabulous contributions to our morning and our celebration. But to introduce Jess properly to you, as it says here, Jess is the Chief Midwife for England, Deputy Chief Midwife for England, and most importantly to us, she is a scholar. So Jess is an alumni of the Florence Nightingale Foundation. Jess has been a midwife since 1985 and has worked in all different areas of practice and really innovated and led within those areas. I think one of the things that I value so significantly about Jess is that her portfolio of work includes leadership. That's part of her remit at NHS England. And what Jess really does is embody everything that I see as a compassionate leader. So when she talks to you in just a moment about her vision for leadership in midwifery, what I can say to you is, from knowing and working with Jess, is this is her being. This is how she works and interacts with everyone she meets. And I've been on the receiving end of that, and I can tell you for sure that Jess is the impact that has is significant. So I hope that you'll enjoy listening to the messages that Jess has to offer you just now. Over to you, Jess. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Gemma, do you mind if I interrupt one little tiny second?
No, go for it, Greta.
I'm about to tell this group a little secret that not many people know. So on the 4th of January 1978, I started my orthopaedic nursing training, and Jess was in the sat above me. So Jess and I have known each other nearly 43 years. Isn't that incredible?
Wow, gosh. Would you testify to the same as I just said, Greta?
Oh, to always a role model.
Always.
In fact, she seemed to wear the nurse's uniform with such panache that and she's twice as tall as I am, which makes a huge difference to what your uniform looks like. But always totally looked up to Jess, and it was for many years that I lost contact until I came to the Florence Nightingale Foundation and found myself sitting next to her at dinner, and we unravelled all the stories we remembered from 40 years ago. So it's amazing that Jess has landed herself in such an incredible job within NHS England, and it's no surprise that she's been totally committed to nursing and then midwifery for all of her professional life. Thank you, Jess.
Oh, right, there we go. I just realized I was muted. Sorry, I'm so totally embarrassed. I don't know if you can see my face or not, but I hope you don't, because it's a very red color right now. But thank you so much, Greta and Gemma. And I have to say, I am completely indebted to the Florence Nightingale Foundation. And the first thing before I say anything else is I want to congratulate all of you for completing this fantastic program that you've been through. My goodness, what an experience you have had. And albeit, during the pandemic, which has restricted FNF from doing what they do so very well, somewhat, I know that you will never forget some of the principles that you've learned through this program. You will always remember that and never forget that. So a huge congratulations to you all. Okay, so let's go on to the first slide. Thank you. That's just an introduction slide, but I just wanted to point out on that introduction slide, you've got my email address. And as Greta pointed out, I'm Deputy Chief Midwifery Officer for England, working with Professor Jackie Dunkley-Bent and my colleague Sasha Wells-Monroe, who's also Deputy Chief Midwifery Officer. My portfolio is leadership and professional, and Sasha's portfolio is quality and safety. So I want you all to know that if you are looking for any means by which you can extend your leadership role or your career or your pathways of what you're on, etc. in your careers, and you're struggling, you're feeling like you're getting to a blockage, please do email me. We want to be available to people who are struggling in unblocking their journeys. So you feel free to email me, and I'll do what I can to help. Okay, next slide. Okay, compassionate, collective, and inclusive leadership. So vitally important. you know, there's things move on at a pace in terms of the studies and the academic world of leadership. And I was really fortunate to be able to go to, in my Florence Nightingale scholarship year, leadership year, to be able to go to Harvard in Boston and study and understand the latest kind of thoughts about leadership. And this issue around compassionate, collective and inclusive leadership stood out really strongly. And I've put this slide in here because I know that you will have had, through this time on this program, you will have had to look at yourself quite intently. You know, you've had the Myers-Briggs undertaken, whether or not you can remember which letters they are, in which order. I know that that will have helped you to understand more about yourself. And it's really helpful, I think, sometimes to think about, what kind of leader am I? It's often a question that's asked at interview. You know, if I asked people who work with you to tell me what kind of a leader you are, what would they say? And so it's really important, this whole issue around self-awareness, understand yourself so well, understand what you believe your purpose is within your career, that you're progressing within your, some people call it a vocation, their nursing, midwifery careers, however you line to, really understand what kind of leader am I? And I know that this course will have helped you to do that. Thank you. Next slide, please. Great. So compassionate leadership. I wanted to start with, this is one of my favorite quotes from Sheila Kitzinger. In all cultures, the midwife's place is on the threshold of life, where intense human emotions, fear, hope, longing, triumph, and incredible physical power enable a new human being to emerge. I just love that. And I think it's so vitally important. We see it in our nursing colleagues as well, this real importance of holding compassion, of living and breathing compassion as we go about our work. And as we deliver our sort of leadership roles, particularly, we have to always hold that compassion and live that compassion. But there are some complexities about this compassionate leadership. And, you know, just through this pandemic, you know, it's been incredible, hasn't it, that we've all lived through this pandemic. We have to bear in mind, or get this balance between compassionate leadership versus command and control, because sometimes the command and control is important, but it has to be done in a compassionate way. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, we had to go into, the NHS went into a command and control system. It was a crisis, and you see that happening all the time, managing crisis. You set up a command and control, an emergency preparedness room is set up, and that's how we manage the crisis. But we have to always come back to that, how we roll out, how we role model the leadership at that time, that we don't allow that compassionate side, understanding and hearing where other people are coming from, to completely get lost when we're focused on command and control. Something that I heard when I was at the Florence Nightingale Foundation course, actually it wasn't the FNF course, it was the Harvard course on leadership. I was given the privilege of hearing Professor Donna Hicks talk about leading with dignity, the importance of dignity, of respecting one another's dignity. And, you know, so often we see in our services challenges between different professional groups, challenges between people that work in the community, people that work in the acute setting, and it's so vitally important that in order for us to be able to demonstrate compassion, we have to respect where people are coming from. We have to respect other people's dignity. And sometimes that's quite difficult to do. We all live with and hold unconscious biases. And it's really, really important as part of our self-awareness, learning who we are, to spot those, to call them out and address them, so that we can lead with dignity and be compassionate as we manage and work in teams and with others. Understanding moral injury. Well, this was the lovely Gemma who shared a piece of work from Neil Greenberg. I'm sure you probably talked about this through your program, but the impact of the pandemic on nurses and midwives' ability to process these tragic and traumatic events that they're going through. Neil Greenberg has coined that phrase, moral injury, and I found that so very, very helpful, that actually I don't think there's any one of us that hasn't been impacted in some way over this moral injury question. You know, it's difficult, it's challenging, you know, and the goalposts are changing because we're having to deal with different information that's coming at us about the pandemic all the time. Do we wear masks? Do we not wear a mask? Do I use public transport? Maybe I don't use public transport. Can I travel out of my zone area? No, I can't travel out of my zone area. It's really, really difficult for everybody. And this issue of moral injury, feeling as if you are caught between two conflicting roles, and you have to find a way through it, is challenging. So I'm delighted that you've been able to experience action learning co-consulting sets within your program, and my hope is that you will continue with those as you move on. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about culture now. So how do you, following this incredible program, how do you impact culture going forward? So, you know, great quote here, and I'm using a lot of this is from the taken from the King's Fund report that came out in September 2020, The Courage of Compassion. Again, I'm sure you've been signposted to this report through your program. So Michael West says in this report, organizational culture is shaped by the nature of its leadership. So important that is. It's the behaviors of leaders, top to bottom and end to end, individually and collectively as a group, that powerfully determines whether care quality is the priority. So this is an incredible opportunity for you now to shape your leadership, to shape who you are, so that you can have an impact on the culture. You can have an impact on the things that you can see. So what are the behaviors and systems, processes and policies that are going on around you? Try to look at them, spot them, and think to yourself, how can I influence that for the better, for the good? Be aware of what's being said around you and what we say. You know, when you hear ideas, goals, values, aspirations of others, you know, have you built yourself up to sometimes challenge them if you don't think that they are actually what they need to be, but equally to agree and to support and to do all that you can to speak with one voice within your organization. So there's two things there. One is challenging when you know it's right to challenge, but the other thing is getting behind your leaders and being that person that says, yes, we can do this, we can do this. And then what do we believe? So those underlying assumptions, and I know you've done lots of work around where do I sit within power dynamics, you know, within how do I respond? Where is my role? Do I feel like I'm in a position of power? Do I influence power, or do I step back and am I slightly pulled, limited by this whole imposter syndrome that I know you've done some talk about that. So that's really encouraging because it will help you to know who you are and how you can impact the culture. Next slide, please. Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so again, compassionate leadership, inclusive leadership and collective leadership. West in his article, in his report, talks about these four things: attending, empathizing, understanding and helping. And I'm just going to say one thing about each of these. So attending is about listening with fascination. And so that's really all I'm going to say about that. I love that phrase, listen with fascination. So often we think we've listened, but we haven't heard. We may have been thinking we were listening, but we haven't heard what was being said. listening with fascination is so important, especially when you think you're within an environment where there are polarizing views. So listen with fascination is your attending area here. Empathizing is an ability to feel the distress without being overwhelmed. And I think for anybody in this conference today, if for anybody who's read the Ockenden report and has read through some of those harrowing stories that parents have been through, that mothers, fathers, families have been through, you will really be able to relate to the empathy that comes out from any of us who have been involved in the caring professions. But it's really, really important that when we hear these stories, when we're aware of these incidences that have happened, that we don't allow ourselves to get overwhelmed, that we are able to say, okay, let's now find out how can we proactively support these families and make sure, which is what we're doing following Ockenden, that this never happens to other families moving forward, that we do all we can to prevent this from happening from any families experiencing this. And I think, you know, Jonathan's lovely presentation about the neonatal care, that was a really good example about that. How do we make sure that we can support other parents to have a different experience? And then helping is about taking thoughtful and intelligent action to help. So it's not just getting alongside at any particular moment at all. It's about applying your intelligence in this and making sure that you are helping in the right direction and in the right way. So apply some thought to it and not always jump in to, right, I'm going to do that because that's going to help, because for all you know, it might not be the right thing to do. Adaptive change is much, much harder than throwing in a solution that you think is the right one. Sometimes you have to go through the journeys that our colleagues we were hearing earlier, Laura and Sophie, about going through a pathway of change. And this is what you have to do. Sometimes that's the better thing to do, to follow a consistent pathway, than to just throw in some supportive help. And then finally, understanding is about being able to get a hold of, appraise a situation, so you get an idea of what the situation is, that people around you, that your colleagues, the colleagues that you work with are struggling with, and make sure that you have an open dialogue. So there is absolutely no blame approach on this one, no blame approach at all. And I know our colleague who talked about working in risk process in the hospital she was in, she will absolutely be on top of this in terms of no blame and having open dialogue. That's how you get to where you need to get to with understanding. Next slide, please. Okay, so leading in the midst of global crises. So yeah, as I said earlier, you've been doing this program of work at the most unusual times in all of our lives. And I think in the midst of the pandemic, all of you will have had to manage barriers to be able to get through your projects and your programs of work. And all of you will have seen opportunities. And I can't remember which one of you it was, but one of you spoke about, I had so many ideas, I had to get somebody to help me understand which one I'm going to go for, which was fantastic, because you can see opportunities. So what I just want to say here is that don't ever think that something is impossible or I'm never going to be able to do that. There are always ways that you can manage barriers and ways that you can create opportunities. And I think the co-consulting way of learning and supporting one another is a fantastic way of understanding how to do these things. Thank you. Next slide. So this is, again, I'm just going to touch very briefly on these points because I think I'm worried I'm going over time. So these points are really relevant to now. What kind of leadership is needed today? How do we apply compassionate leadership through this pandemic? As I said earlier, sometimes you do need control and command. So number one here is about designing from the heart and the head. So it's a bit like I said earlier about having that intelligence that you can apply, but also that you can walk compassionately with the people around you, with your staff, with the people you're working with. So having getting the balance right between those two things. Putting the mission first. Now, this is critical for us right now. We've just had the Ockenden report land last week. Putting the mission first. So we need to focus now on those 7 immediate and essential actions that have come out of the Ockenden report. You will have seen, especially those midwives who will be more familiar with the newsletters and information that's come out, that there is a temptation to be sidelined into other discussions about whether continuity of care is right or not, discussions again about whether normal birth is the right phrase to use for physiological birth. But you know what? Those 2 areas of discussion, important that they are not in the Ockenden report. They're not covered in the Ockenden 7 immediate and essential actions. So put the mission first. As a leader, you need to be able to focus on what the important thing is and not be distracted. Speed over elegance. I really like that one. Speed over elegance. Yes. Well, we all saw that. We experienced that when COVID hit. There was a need for speed. And also we've seen this, we are experiencing this in the world of midwifery and maternity now, following the Ockenden review. So you have to, again, get this balance right between addressing things as quickly as you possibly can, but also by not confusing the system by too many people saying different things. Okay, I think this might be a sign that I'm being sped along. So let me just jump the other things. You can look them up yourselves on that previous slide. So this is just for you to be aware of, and I'm not going to talk much to this because we have had those wonderful examples from your colleagues, which has demonstrated perfectly this arc of how do you drive change? How do we deliver change? The only thing I want to highlight here is co-design, because today's world, it's vitally important we co-design everything with our service users. For us in maternity, that's midwives, women and families. Next slide, please. I love this because this is Sarah Gilbert, Professor Sarah Gilbert. And I just want to encourage all of you to go out from this program, lead at the cutting edge and drive the future. And Professor Sarah Gilbert led, as I'm sure you all know, on the vaccine work that was done in Oxford. And what I love about the example of how she led was that she had a profile at the very beginning, and then I don't know how many of you noticed that she sort of slipped away into the background. And I loved that you don't have to have that high profile all the time, but she's somebody that demonstrated that really well. And final slide, you'll be glad to hear. This comes back to the great big thank you, really, to all of you, and congratulations to all of you. I know that our Chief Nursing Officer and our Chief Midwifery Officer, Jackie Dunkley-Bent and Ruth May, both congratulate nurses and midwives who have done amazing jobs in their roles by giving out sort of, then are they medals? No, they're more awards for nurses and midwives who've done exemplary pieces of work. And I just wanted to finish on this to say, I think all of you should be looking to be nominated to receive these awards, because you have done and you will be doing in the future. You're our bright stars for the future. So go out there and, and surprise yourself, surprise us all, and continue to apply all the learning that you have learned throughout this exciting programme. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jess. Round of applause for Jess. Thank you so much. My goodness, Jess, that was just the tonic that I needed to hear today. I'm sure that you have made everybody feel so inspired, but also very warm and looked after and promoted and supported to take this forward. So thank you. Thank you for all of those messages. We're going to offer the group now some time to break off into small groups to reflect on what you've heard so far this morning, and to reflect with each other on your experience of the programme. And when we come back, we want to help you to gather a memento of this programme. So we can't physically award you and give you your certificates and pin badges at the moment, but we will be able to send those out into the post to you when we return to our office. But what we thought we would do instead is when we come back to the group is to invite every single one of you. I'm going to ask Miriam to call out all your names and for you to give us one word that describes how the programme has influenced you or your experience of the programme, what it's meant to you. And what we'll do is edit that all together and send it to you so you've got that momentum of the programme. So before we send you off into your small groups, I'm going to read to you a poem. And I think listening to the messages that you heard from Jess and taking the messages of this poem into your reflections will help you to get a sense of the true meaning of the programme to you. So it's called Return to Love, and it's by Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. As we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, generous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people do feel insecure around you. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.